Senators, I see that we have a quorum, so I'd like to call this meeting to order. Good evening. My name is Fabian Manning. I'm a Senator from Newfoundland and Labrador, and I'm pleased to chair this meeting. Before I give the floor to our witnesses, I would like to invite the members of the committee to introduce themselves first, beginning on my immediate right.
Good afternoon. Mark Gold from Quebec.
Senator Murray Sinclair from Manitoba.
Welcome here. I'm Don Plett, also from Manitoba.
Tobias Berger, Senator from Ontario.
Eric Farray, la région du Golfe, Québec.
Tom McGuinness, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Senators. We may have some other senators that will be joining us shortly. The committee is continuing the examination of Bill S-203, an act to amend the criminal code and other acts ending the captivity of whales and dolphins. We are pleased this evening to welcome Mr. John Holer, President and owner of Marineland, through video link. Along with Minister Holer will be Andrew Burns. Andrew Burns is down here. Wayne Thomson, Chairman of Niagara Falls Tourism, is with Mr. Holer. And we have with us this evening here at the table Mr. Andrew Burns, Legal Counsel to Marineland from Hunt Partners, Barristers and Solicitors. We have about an hour or so, so I would ask our witnesses if we'd like to get to questions as soon as we can. Understand you have some opening statements, but our time is of essence. So I believe Mr. Holer would begin with opening remarks, or Mr. Thomson, I'm not sure.
Mr. Thomson will speak first.
Oh, Mr. Thomson will speak first. Okay. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, sincere thanks for the opportunity to do this, and thanks for the technology that exists today to permit this to happen. I would just like to say we appreciate this opportunity to have input into what we think, without exception, is an extremely important factor for the city of Niagara Falls. I'd like to start just by saying my name is Wayne Thomson, and you might ask, what is Wayne Thomson doing there, and why is he in this situation in support of Marineland? I go back to 1969 when I was first elected to City Council, and after that I spent 17 years as the longest serving mayor in the city of Niagara Falls, and I'm just still on City Council and coming up to 20 years serving on City Council. So I have been subjected to the economy in this community, where we have lost all of our industry that was located here 75 years ago. It's lost because of power costs and other reasons. And thank God we have Niagara Falls and the Niagara Parks Commission, which has provided us the opportunity to be, without exception, the #1 leisure destination in Canada. And we fight extremely hard every day to make that happen. I'm the chairman of Niagara Falls Tourism, probably one of the reasons I'm here, chairman of the Scotiabank Convention Center, and chairman of several other committees. But I am so passionate about the opportunity to be here today to talk about how important Marineland is to our community. I'd like to just say a couple of words about Mr. John Holer, who is not only the owner and who created Marineland, but is as our association over the past 40 some odd years, we have become very good friends, and I appreciate what he has accomplished. John started off 55 years ago when there was no such thing as a protester about animals in captivity. 55 years he worked. He started with a large swimming pool above ground, about 15 feet tall, with some portholes in the side where people could look in and see seals swimming with some female swimmers that would swim along with them. He took that small initial start and built it into one of the major attractions in Canada and theme parks in Canada, and one of the major attractions for the city of Niagara Falls. At one point, 54% of the rooms that were rented in this area were because of their visits to Marineland. Marineland spends $4.5 million a year on advertising our destination, always Niagara Falls first, and then Marineland. And John Holer is, without exception, one of the most important people in our community with respect to employment. In the summer season, there are 800 jobs at Marineland, and that is just the start. Because of what he does, the marketing, and what he does, it creates hundreds and hundreds of jobs throughout our community. So I am here without exception with a strong feeling and support for what he has accomplished over the past 55 years. He's 82 years old now, and I find it amazing that we're talking about animals in captivity that have been there for 55 years, and he has, without exception, one of the finest water parks probably in the world. If you compare the tanks that he has for the different mammals and the different belugas and dolphins, they're the largest of any place in the world. And he has had the most success with new mammals being born than anybody else, certainly in North America. So I'm extremely passionate and very supportive of what Mr. Holer has done, but what this has meant to our community is, without exception, beyond any words that you could say. So I'm delighted to be here to support him, to support our community, because this is what we have left. We have a community that is totally dependent on tourism and visitation. We go back to what we used to call the magic 100 days, when people used to come to Niagara Falls. They'd go down and have their picture taken in front of the falls, and then leave and go elsewhere on their visitation in Canada. We used to call that the magic 100 days because they would come May 24th weekend and throughout the summer, and then after Labor Day, everything would close up and all the jobs would be lost and everybody was on unemployment insurance and out of work. It was pretty sad. Now we have year-round tourism because of a lot of the spectacular things that have happened in our community: casinos, Marineland, fine dining, the wine country in our area, the golf courses. Everything is a spectacular place to visit, and Marineland was the start of this, and it continues to be the major attraction. Anyway, those are my initial comments, and I'll ask Mr. Holder if he would like to make some comments.
My name is John Holder. I've been starting my business way back in 1961 with $2,000 in my pocket, and with a big idea, and I continue proceeding with my development, and today all those things has grown into one of the largest theme park in Canada, and what it represents is over 1,000-acre park. That is, it is more than halfway developed, and is the rest of it part under development. And I'm hoping that in the next 3 or 4 years, I would be able to complete the park, and that is going to make it definitely an outstanding facilities in anywhere in the world. And you have to understand how the tourism work. You would ask yourself, why did we see such an increase of tourism in Niagara Falls? And in my opinion, everything is time. When the visitors came to Marineland, they spent the whole day. Some of them, they spent 2 days. They come back the next day. And in order for them to spend the day, they have to find accommodation, hotel room, and everything else that comes with it. The restaurant, the shopping, other entertainment. And this is how the tourism is built. When you compare other areas like Orlando, Orlando, the whole reason that Orlando has become so successful is with all the things that Orlando has to offer to our visitors. So when the visitor decided to go there, they spent average, I think, close to a week or sometimes 10 days. And this is how an area will develop into tourism and invite visitors to come to see us. Now, Niagara Falls, it's a great attraction, but it doesn't hold the visitors, because average person that comes to visit Niagara Falls, he could see the Niagara Falls in 2 hours. And then they ask themselves, what else you got to offer? But when they come to Marineland, they spend the entire day. And that's why we get 54% of all the hotel rooms that exist in Niagara Falls are related to Marineland. Simply because the people decide they want to overnight, they want to see other things, and they want to experience the other attractions or, want to have a nice dinner. And this is how the tourism is formed. You could talk as much you want. You're not going to hold them. You have to create activities for them so that they freely will want to spend the time. And the time is what makes economy grow. And definitely we have proof here in Niagara Falls. Just with my own operation, we employ between 700 and 800 people. That generate many other things because the tourism, one thing helps with the other, and the experience that visitors get, it is what is so important.
Thank you, Mr. Holder. Mr. Burns.
Marineland's operations are completely transparent. All of its marine mammals have and will always be subject to and available for inspection and accessible to credible scientific researchers at no cost. Marineland is committed to public accountability and transparency and the evolution of its business and animal welfare policies. It has and will continue to evolve. It commits millions of dollars a year directly to the support, care, and health of all its marine mammals, all without any public funding. Thousands of school children and special needs children visit Marineland as part of class trips every year. Marineland attracts close to 1 million visitors yearly to the Niagara region. You have heard testimony that direct and long-term scientific evaluation of the beluga whales at Marineland support that they are healthy and do not display abnormal behavior. There is no apparent need for this bill in the context of the welfare, care, management, and movement of marine mammals. Frankly, this bill is confusing, and the rationale for it even more so. The activists have said that this bill won't shut down the Vancouver Aquarium or Marineland. The bill won't affect their operations, yet they say the bill is necessary because of the conditions of the whales at Marineland or the Vancouver Aquarium. That is because this bill isn't really about Marineland or the Vancouver Aquarium. This bill also isn't about integrating a necessary piece of animal welfare legislation within the existing federal and provincial scheme of animal welfare legislation, treaties, and agreements. This bill is about advancing an agenda, the granting of the rights of a person to whales, what activists call a non-human person, and then to other species. In fact, the very same arguments you have heard from Ms. Marino and others were raised by Ms. Marino in a very recent criminal case in Ontario involving an activist interacting with pigs being delivered to a slaughterhouse. Ms. Marino testified in that case to the same level of social behavior and intelligence of pigs as she did before this committee in relation to whales, in arguing that both pigs and whales should be considered as non-human persons under the law, which was rejected by the court. I would like to refer the members of this committee directly to the bill. The proposed criminal code offense under Bill S-203 can be divided into two parts. The first part, the words owning, having custody or control of a cetacean are used. The word possession is not used. However, possession means the state of having custody or control. Under the second part and the Fisheries Act, the prohibition extends to cetaceans in captivity. The word capture is not used. Capture means to take captive or to gain possession or control of. The activists, in response to questions, have expressly said they do not object to the right to hunt or hunting by the Inuit, and the prohibition on captivity will not affect that. They, I suggest, and the bill itself, deliberately avoids the use of the words harvest, possession, or capture. That reflects either a lack of understanding of the express rights of the Inuit or is deliberately disingenuous. I refer you to the answer by Mr. Burns from the DFO during his testimony that under the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement, Inuit have the express right to sell any wildlife lawfully harvested, and the Nunavut Agreement is protected under the Constitution. The fundamental right is to harvest wildlife. The Land Claims Agreement expressly creates a system of wildlife harvesting rights, priorities, and privileges, recognizes expressly the need for an effective role for the Inuit in all aspects of wildlife management, and provides for the establishment of a Nunavut Wildlife Management Board with the express and sole authority to establish levels of total allowable harvest. Wildlife is defined in the Land Claims Agreement as all flora and fauna. That includes beluga whales, narwhals, bowhead whales, in total 88 species. The fundamental right to harvest wildlife is expressly defined in that agreement. In the Land Claims Agreement, harvest means the reduction of wildlife into possession, which is custody and control, which is the exact phrase used in this bill, and includes hunting, trapping, fishing, killing, and capturing. The express rights to harvest wildlife, to take possession of wildlife, to hunt, kill, or capture wildlife under the Land Claims Agreement cannot be avoided, breached, or abrogated in our submission by transparently avoiding the use of the words capture or possession in this bill, when the meaning of those words is identical to the language used in the bill. There is quite clearly a serious issue to be considered whether this bill affects expressly enumerated rights of the Inuit set out in the Land Claims Agreement. There can be no doubt in our submission as to the fundamental importance of the issues raised by this bill to the Inuit way of life, and these issues do not affect incidental rights. These are fundamental rights of the Inuit. I refer you to the paper Co-Management of Beluga Whales in Nunavut, Canada. At page 21, it states a beluga whale is a culturally, economically, nutritionally, and socially important resource to the Inuit. And at page 18, it is clear, and it states, the following Inuit organizations sit at the same table to negotiate management issues with the DFO: the Quebec and Kativik regional governments, Makivik Corporation, landholding corporations, and Gugavik, the local hunting, fishing, and trapping associations, and representatives from 14 separate communities. This bill intrudes directly into issues of constitutionally protected Inuit rights and the developed co-management of a culturally, economically, nutritionally, and socially important resource to the Inuit. Marineland agrees that this bill raises a very serious issue of whether there is a constitutional, legal, or moral duty to consult the Inuit with respect to the impact of this bill, and respectfully suggests that careful consideration be given as to whether the duty to consult in this instance goes well beyond consultation in relation to the issue of the sale of narwhal tusks and extends to the impact and the nature and scope of expressly enumerated fundamental rights of the Inuit to harvest wildlife. Based on its understanding of what has transpired to date, Marineland does not believe that the duty to consult raised by this bill has yet to be fulfilled. Marineland supports an effective and thorough consultation process with the Inuit prior to the clause-by-clause review of this bill. Whether the duty to consult is mandated by the courts or not, while that is clearly an important consideration, in our submission it is not determinative. This committee respectfully may wish to consider whether in this specific instance, given the terms of the land claims agreement, the central importance of whales to the Inuit culture, along with the role of the Senate in our Constitution, thorough consultation with the Inuit is appropriate in any event of any decision by the court regarding the duty to consult. Independent of that duty, the prohibitions proposed by this bill appear on their face to be incapable of being reconciled with the express rights of the Inuit people. And that gives rise to the question of whether this bill, if passed into law, would be void in any event because it is unconstitutional. Finally, and to be clear, Marineland sees no legitimate purpose or immediate or critical need for this legislation that is not already thoroughly addressed by comprehensive law, regulations, and treaties already in effect and enforced at the national and provincial level, most recently in the province of Ontario, where Marineland operates and is subject to routine, unannounced inspections by a new legislated OSPCA Zoom inspection team. Thousands upon thousands of Canadians, including the Inuit people, farmers, scientists, members of numerous government agencies and departments, and thousands who work in our aquariums and zoos are dedicated to maintaining and improving animal welfare. All of our laws, regulations, policies, and procedures are based on a fundamental concern for and focus on animal welfare. Can we all do better? Yes, we can, and we are committed to doing so. The important point is that our understanding of animal welfare evolves as we all learn more. This bill simply does not assist with that process, and worse, impedes conservation and research efforts, distracts from the real issues facing our wildlife by demanding the creation of personal rights for animals, and even worse, this bill on its face appears to strike directly at expressly enumerated constitutional rights of the Inuit people. Marineland cannot, therefore, support this bill. Thank you for your consideration.
And thank you to our witnesses, and I want to advise our senators that we have a long list of people who want to ask questions, and as we have time constraints, I'm going to ask you to propose one question. I'll ask the question to be as distinct as possible, and the answers to be as distinct as possible also, and I don't have to cut somebody off. And I don't want to do that, but I may have to. So we're going to start with Senator Platt.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses. Mr. Holder, pleasure to see you again. You're looking well, and the last time we talked, you said you wanted to be in this business till you were 90 years old, and so certainly looking forward to visiting you on your 90th birthday at Marineland. I'll direct my questions, and Chair, I will be brief. I will ask two questions on this round, and if there's time, of course, but I'll ask both questions right away, and I'll ask them of Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns, Marineland has been the subject of a Toronto Star expose and multiple investigations. Can you tell us what happened and what the outcome were of those investigations? And immediately, my second question. I understand that the government of Ontario went through a process of updating its animal welfare laws. Could you tell us what happened and who was involved in updating those laws?
When those allegations were made, Marineland was subject immediately to a thorough investigation by numerous agencies, the OSPCA, the Niagara Falls Humane Society, independent experts from the Vancouver Aquarium, the Calgary Zoo, the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Labor, and ultimately a team of independent outside experts appointed by the Government of Ontario. Activists you have heard from and others vocally and relentlessly pursued those allegations. All were investigated, none were substantiated. After the entire process that took over a year, all those allegations, not a single charge has been laid by anyone in relation to any marine mammal at Marineland. I would like to repeat that no agency under the Criminal Code or the OSPCA Act believed it had reasonable or probable grounds that a marine mammal at Marineland was or is being abused. And the legislative process, review process, was triggered by this investigation. It was a 2-year process. It included the formation of a technical advisory group composed of many of the activists you have heard from, including Zoo Check and Miss Naomi Rose. There was an independent review by outside appointed independent experts. They prepared a report which was submitted to the government. And following that process, there were public hearings and the passing of new legislation, including regulations. It was within the ambit of the independent review to determine whether or not the captivity of marine mammals should cease in Ontario, and instead the conclusion was that marine mammals could be kept in captivity subject to certain strict conditions. Those have been legislated and they are enforced by newly created zoo inspection teams of the OSPCA who conduct regular announced and unannounced inspections of zoos and aquariums throughout Ontario.
Thank you. If there's a second round, Chair, please.
Yep. Thank you, Senator Brett. Senator Ubley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all our presenters this evening. My question will be for Mr. Holler as well. And I apologize for not being here for your presentation, but you can fill me in on any information that you feel is relevant. Aside from Kiska the orca, how many cetaceans, belugas and dolphins does Marineland currently have?
55, I believe.
55 in total?
I believe that's my approximate understanding.
Okay. If Bill S-203 becomes law, Marineland will be allowed, and I would like to make this very clear, that they would be allowed to keep and display all these cetaceans for many years to come. I believe that's understood.
Well, there's a significant problem with the bill as it stands now, which is that it provides for a facility that has a certain number of marine mammals, cetaceans, in captivity on the day it comes into effect to be allowed to keep it. But if a beluga whale is pregnant prior to the date of the bill coming into effect and gives birth after the bill comes into effect, the birth of that beluga whale triggers the commission of a criminal offense.
That would be a question that I could not verify for sure. I would think that if there was a pregnancy, that would be accountable. I guess my question then would be that given that there is time on your side, that could Marineland adopt a business model based on its other attractions that it has? I believe they have amusement rides, or they have birds and land animal exhibits. I'm wondering if you have considered reinventing Marineland so that you can still educate, if you will, youngsters about marine life without keeping whales and dolphins in captivity.
Marineland continues to evolve. It's committed to evolving. It's Mr. Holler has a massive expansion underway, but at the heart of Marineland are the marine mammals.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ubley. Senator McGuinness.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming. Some of my questions have been answered, but let me just specifically talk about the amendments to the Ontario Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act and the amendments there too. What effect did the legislation have on your operation? Did you object to the bill at law amendments or at any hearing? During the debate on Bill 80, was there any discussion about shutting down your marine operation? And I'll just conclude with this second question, because allegedly there's been numerous independent studies and investigations that have all concluded that the marine mammals at Marineland are healthy and well taken care of. So did Marineland initiate the studies? Did you pay to have the studies done? What was the purpose of having the studies? And you've answered this question. Allegedly, the Ontario various departments that do inspection agree with the operation as it now is operating. So could you answer those? Did you get them all?
Yeah, I think I've got. Yeah. If I miss one, please tell me. But this was a major public issue, and it engaged a response by all the relevant investigative bodies and agencies in Ontario. So the studies, the investigations, the reviews they completed, which was from top to bottom, every single animal was looked at. All of the medical records for each animal was looked at. All of the facilities of Marineland were looked at. All that was done independently by those agencies performing their functions in accordance with the law. Marineland's position throughout was to be entirely transparent and to provide access to each agency and any individual seeking information to the full extent possible. Marineland voluntarily retained the services of one of the North America's largest engineering firms that deals with issues of potable water to completely review the entire facility, which is a computer-controlled multi-million dollar water treatment facility. And they in fact advised me that in most respects it was better than most municipal drinking water systems we have in the country. And that report was completed and is posted online and made available to the public.
Did you object at any time?
There was some objection. One of the objections was to the prohibition against Kiska, the lone killer whale left in Canada, having a companion. We vociferously objected to that on the basis that it seemed unreasonable to Marineland that Kiska should be denied a companion in her old age who could then be transferred out again once she passed away. But that was not allowed.
So you worked closely?
Pardon me?
You worked closely?
We worked hand in hand. We had numerous meetings with the government, and we worked very closely with all the agencies involved. I was personally involved with it from beginning to end, and it was an extremely extensive public consultation process that went on for 2 years, and it was very thorough and comprehensive, in my view.
Thank you.
Senator McGuinness, Senator Forrest.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Do you understand French?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the English Channel. This is the English Channel. Okay. You said in your brief that Marineland was subject to the most stringent standards in the world. You have my full confidence on that. What we were told here is that the organization conducting inspections and accrediting such facilities as Marineland, and therefore it's the Association of Canadian Aquariums and Zoos, is Marineland a member of that, and was it accredited by AZAC?
The provincial standards are enforced by the Government of Ontario through the OSPCA Act. Independent of that is Canada's accredited zoos and aquariums. The inspections by them in our submission are independent. They are done by highly credible people. The individuals who actually reviewed the situation at Marineland included the president of the Calgary Zoo and the head vet at the Vancouver Aquarium, among others. Those individuals are serious academic individuals in their own right, and in my view are not people who are going to simply damage their own reputation in the interests of another institution. That is not the purpose of CASA. Marineland has been a member of CASA. Marineland voluntarily withdrew from CASA this summer during the 100-acre expansion of Marineland, simply because, due to a timing issue, reaccreditation occurs this summer in June, and Marineland is in the process of undergoing one of the largest expansions it ever has, and that expansion requires reaccreditation itself, and therefore that will occur in the next year or two. But Marineland remains completely committed to the principles of CASA, and as the regulations are enforced in Ontario, and they are the toughest standards and regulations now in force in the world, Marineland meets or exceeds all standards in any event, whether being temporarily out of CASA to permit this expansion or not.
En clair, ce que vous me dites, c'est que actuellement, compte tenu.
So to be clear, what you're saying is that given the plans for expansion, Marineland does not have CASA accreditation.
Through a very extensive process of discussion and review in the
It is in the course of gaining accreditation. My last question, Mr. Chairman, if I may. While hearing other witnesses, I had asked whether some would agree to a compromise of the bill which would restrict the prohibition on capturing wild cetaceans for commercial purposes. A number of witnesses that you call activists felt that this would be an interesting compromise. In your view, would maintaining the prohibition of wild cetaceans be an amendment that would be acceptable to you?
That issue strikes directly at the express fundamental rights of the Inuit set out in the Land Claims Agreement, which states that they have an express right to sell any wildlife lawfully harvested according to the DFO. And so that amendment in our submission would also be a matter that would require consultation with the Inuit.
Thank you, Senator Forrest. Senator Gold.
Thank you. Welcome. This is a question for Mr. Holder. Does Marineland have plans to import any additional cetaceans, whales, or dolphins? And if so, over what period of time, what species, and in what numbers?
No. Are you asking me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
At the moment, we don't have any plans to expand, bring in any new marine mammals into our facilities because we are breeding our own. We have this year 7 successful birds from our beluga whales, and we feel that they will be able to reproduce. Some of the old ones would be eventually cast away. And as far as concerning the dolphins, we have 5 dolphins, and we have not had any young ones, and we're hoping that someday we will be able to get some more dolphins.
If I may just follow up, and you'll forgive my ignorance about the breeding habits or practices around cetaceans, but do you breed them proactively, or do these pregnancies just happen because they happen to be swimming in the pools together?
I think I can answer that, and the answer is that it happens in a natural way. There is no artificial insemination at Marineland. There is no interference with the natural behavior of the beluga whales, and to the extent that they do breed, it is a voluntary activity of the beluga whales. What is critical, though, is to note, as Mr. Holder has, that there was a 100% success rate in births of beluga whales last year. That is unprecedented. In the wild, the percentage that is born is and survives is very low, and this level of success of breeding is based on decades of experience and very hard lessons learned by Mr. Holder and Marineland.
Do I take it from your answer, though, then, that they are encouraged to breed as opposed to breed accidentally?
They're not encouraged one way or the other.
Yeah. Thank you.
There is no interference or effort in any way to cause or encourage a beluga whale to breed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Gold. Senator Sinclair.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Holler, I'm just curious about the nature of Marineland's functioning. It appears to me, from what you've said, that much of your activity is around the entertainment aspect of the industry relating to cetaceans. You display them, you put on performances, you charge people fees to come and watch the performances and spend the day. Can you tell me how much money you make from that element of your industry or your your functioning on an annual basis?
All the money that Marineland ever took in is put back into the business and expand the business. I never took any money out except money that I live on.
And how much money would you have taken in last year then?
We took in a substantial amount of money. We charged $45 admission to a ticket. And those tickets, that money is spent to keep up the cost of the animals and also to keep up the cost of the entire park. Marineland does not get any additional money from government or any other sources. That is actually unheard in any other facilities. And this is simple because to me, my whole view is I want to generate money, put money back in the business. This is how I started, because I started only with $2,000 and I turned this into a multi-million dollars operations. And this is how this thing is done.
Thank you. Can you tell me how much money your operation has made with regard to breeding cetaceans for other marine entities in North America, around the world?
I can answer that.
You know the answer, Council?
I think I can tell you the answer is that Marineland does not breed beluga whales or other cetaceans on demand for any institution. That does not happen. Institutions around the world do not order marine mammals from Marineland. That has not happened.
Thank you, Council. I wonder, Mr. Holler, do I have time for one more? One little one? Yeah. Thank you. We've heard evidence here from other representatives that you have a sufficient stock of cetaceans to be able to continue functioning for quite a number of years to come, even with this legislation. Do you agree with that statement or not?
Well, with any living things, you know, because the animals do reproduce, and that would probably continue. And we are not interested to sell the animals. We did exchange some animals with SeaWorld, and because we feel that it's a very healthy situation when you could exchange animals with other facilities in order to keep the right breeding stock. And I hope that we'll be able to continue doing this.
Thank you, Mr. Holler. On the second round, if we have the chair. Thank you.
I don't mean to interrupt. I just want to make sure I clarify the answer for you so that there's no confusion. For you, Senator, that is that I think I wanted to be clear that Marineland does not breed on demand for institutions. However, Marineland's success is well known around the world, and institutions do approach Marineland seeking to either loan or buy marine mammals from Marineland. That does happen.
Second round, please.
Yep. Thank you, Senator Verga.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. A lot of our critics have, mentioned that whale watching is the best way to do this. However, I have a special needs daughter who will not be able to see them in the wild because of the turbulence and all those kind of problems. But that's not really my question. My question is more like I understand that Marineland has initiated programs and hosted special events for children with autism and other special needs. Could you comment on Marineland's involvement with these causes? And my other question is actually, does Marineland work with educators? What does Marineland offer? Can you let me know more of this,
So
please?
thousands of school children visit Marineland as part of class trips every year. And these continue to take place today. That includes thousands of families who lack the financial means to pay for a private visit, to visit Marineland. They're taught about marine and land animals and how they're cared for, what they eat, and how they survive. And they are also provided with hands-on interactions with the animals. In addition, at least 3,500 special needs children every year visit Marineland through special programs, including events like Autism Day, where parents with children with special needs, in this case autism, can attend and see the animals. Marineland has been engaged in those programs for decades and continues to do so. Marineland also works with Children's Wish Foundation groups, other groups including Wounded Soldiers. I can tell you that I myself became aware of a wounded soldier whose mother phoned crying because the photo of him next to a dolphin at Marineland was the first time she had seen her son smile since he was injured fighting. So Marineland works with those groups, will continue to do so, and works with children with special needs going from minor disabilities to major special needs issues.
Oh, well, my other question was, does Marineland work with educators, and what does Marineland offer? I mean, can any university go to your office?
Yes, and so, for example, there is an animal care committee. Any researcher, any program, any school can make a request to Marineland. Marineland does not charge, unlike many other institutions, for anyone to come and attend. For example, classes from Canisius College come regularly and attend at the park to do research and to learn about the animals.
I'll go for the second round.
Thank you, Senator Burgett. Okay, we're going to go to the second round. I'm going to limit one question per senator because we have a list going here again. One question, as I said, short and distinct, and hopefully the answers will stay the same way. Senator Platt.
Well, thank you, Chair, and with your indulgence, it'll be 1.5 because I do.
You better combine it into one.
Well, okay, and it'll be done immediately. But the reason I want to do this, Chair, is I want to ask Mr. Burns what this bill would do if this bill passed. What it would do to Marineland, with a follow-up to Mr. Thomson. If Marineland, depending on Mr. Burns's answer, but we've heard that this could literally destroy Marineland, what that would do to the Niagara Falls economy. So it is two questions, but the judge says that's okay. So, Mr. Burns, what would the bill do to Marineland? And if it would do what we've heard, Mr. Thomson, what would it do to the Niagara Falls economy?
In our submission, it would fundamentally critically damage Marineland. The effect of the bill, as currently drafted, would require Marineland to tear apart working, good, healthy, active social groups of marine mammals that are living and breeding and are healthy at Marineland, and we would have to tear them apart because it bans essentially breeding, which would cause a huge amount of stress, unnecessary stress, and damage what is a working and healthy group of active animals. And in our view, it would essentially destroy Marineland's future.
Mr. Thomson, what would that do if Marineland was no longer there, or even there at half the capacity? What would that do to the economy in Niagara Falls?
Well, first of all, that's really the reason that I'm here. and I've been involved for so long, I feel that some of the decisions and work that I've done has helped Marineland to be where it is today, and it's because of my passion for creating jobs and for keeping people working and having opportunities. If Marineland were damaged in any way and the visitation was cut substantially, it would immediately affect not only the jobs at Marineland, the jobs in the restaurants, the jobs in the hotels, and have a detrimental effect on our entire economy when it is, at this particular point, we're experiencing the best 2 or 3 years that the city of Niagara Falls has had with respect to visitation, mainly because of the attractions that we have here, Marineland leading the way, but also the exchange on the dollar, which is bringing the Americans back after the disastrous situation of the passport issue, which made it mandatory for Americans to come here. Only 27% of Americans had passports at that particular time, and we had many difficult years after that. It's slowly coming back where the Americans are visiting and keeping our economy afloat, and certainly the jobs are doing exceptionally well. So without Marineland, we'd have some serious problems.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ubley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, again. You've provided a chart with your statement that compares the tank volume of various aquariums around the world, but the chart does not indicate how many cetaceans are housed in any of these other aquariums, or even if there are cetaceans and what kind. Could you get that information for us?
Some of that information is privately held because I've tried to look for it, but I will do our best to get that information to you to the extent that we can obtain it. We will provide that to you.
Could I just quickly ask, why would it be private?
Because many institutions don't want to share information about their stock, what pools they're in, etc. Because when it becomes public, they become subject to, all these institutions have the same issues with groups that are quite firm and vociferous in their beliefs. So they don't often want to share a lot of information.
Thank you. If you could do that, that'd be
I'll
fine.
do our
Give us
very
an
best,
idea.
best to provide it to you.
Thank you, Senator Ubley. Senator Sinclair.
Thank you, Chair. Just one more question, and then I'll ask Mr. Burns this question because he probably knows the answer far better than Mr. Holler would. Marineland is facing, I believe, 11 or 12 cruelty charges under the SPCA Act of Ontario relating to land animals, not to cetaceans.
That's correct.
So I wonder if you would tell me what's happening with regard to those.
Okay, with respect to those charges, they're currently before the court. Some disclosure has been made. We are currently in discussions with the Crown regarding the provision of additional disclosure, relevant disclosure, and the status of the charges. We expect that a judicial pretrial will be scheduled on June 2nd. Following that judicial pretrial, depending on what occurs, the matter would be set for trial.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sinclair. And Senator Verga.
Chair, and once again, I would like to know, we're talking about the kids again, and can you maybe share with us, when kids goes to Marineland, I remember my kid does, the experience, and they get inspired, and they really appreciate nature. I mean, that's what my kid did, told me anyway. But can you give me some feedback from educators or maybe special groups after they have visited your
Well,
facilities?
I can give a personal example here. My son has special needs. And my other two children have gone with him. And then following that visit, we went on a family trip to New Brunswick, and because of their interest in the whales at Marineland, they expressed an interest to go whale watching, which they then did. So they both experienced whales at Marineland and on the coast whale watching. And I and myself have visited the Arctic. Mr. Holler's been to the Arctic dozens of times, and now my children are expressing an interest in going on my next trip to the Arctic. So I think that gives an example.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Berger. I want to thank our witnesses here this evening and for their cooperation, and my fellow senators for their cooperation. And we'll finish up, and we'll see you on Thursday morning. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.